Hello and welcome to the Parker Files, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Hot Toys Mysterio, MMS 556. This figure is from the movie Spider-Man Far From Home. If you're new to the channel, there'll be more Marvel 6-scale figures and diorama reviews coming your way, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss those. And if you are a subscriber, thank you for stopping by once again and your ongoing support of the Parker Files. For the packaging, Hot Toys have done a superb job keeping the continuity of the Far From Home line and still maintaining individual branding around each character. And while this artwork is in line with that of its predecessors, meaning the main graphic is the same image of Mysterio and the figure in the box is being represented inside the dome of his helmet, what separates this box art from the others in the line, and what I don't particularly like about it, is that we end up with an image of Mysterio within his own helmet. For this release, I was kind of hoping it would be Spider-Man's head as the main image and Mysterio being reflected in his eyes. But personal wish aside, I have to say, once again, this is graphic artwork at its finest, and I love the overall presentation we get here. While this is a standard release, Hot Toys have given it more of a deluxe or DX style vibe with an upgraded box art. The color scheme of green and purple is conscious and classic, but it's the incredible artwork and subtle pixelation details that catch your eye initially, and I love it. The Marvel logo and Spider-Man Far From Home branding is front and center on the top, and the Mysterio tag is on the sides of the box in white against green, and while it wraps around to the sides, it's the image of Mysterio himself that is front and center, and I love the reflective detail of the dome itself, as well as the haze that is noticeable in certain angles and light. The back of the box carries the continuity of other figures in the line with some simple lines here, and though the colors used do speak to this figure specifically, the large Spider-Man symbol doesn't. I would have preferred the use of Mysterio's triangle rune symbol that is found elsewhere, but that's a small gripe. Removing the outer slipcover of the box reveals the rest of the image of Mysterio, and it's magnificent. On the bottom, we see the full title of this release, as well as Mysterio's symbol and some pixelation, and I love how this looks together. From there, we see a gray Spider-Man symbol on one side of the box on matte black, which contrasts perfectly against the full image of Mysterio that wraps around the other side of the box. Again, this is graphic artwork at its finest, as the image of Mysterio is glorious and wonderfully detailed. The scene in the background frames Mysterio really well, and I love all the fine details represented here that speak to the character and what happened in the film. The drones flying overhead, along with the pixelation and holographic lines around the helmet, bring this overall image together beautifully. On the back of the box, we see the large, stunning representation of Mysterio's symbol with green lighting effects reflecting out from its center and surrounded by more pixelation details. The white and pink lines are simple yet effective contrast, but the most interesting thing to me about this artwork isn't what or who you see, but it's what and who you don't see. Unlike the other figures in this line and their similar artwork, in this case we don't get the typical credits to the cast and crew who bring Mysterio to our shelves, and keeping that a mystery is the most on-brand thing they could have done. Opening up the box reveals the conclusion to the front image of Mysterio wrapped around to the back, with Spider-Man himself in a glorious pose surrounded by more drones. I love this image of Spidey so much, I think I'm going to change the pose of my upgraded suit Spidey once this review is done. On the opposite side, we see the Man of Mystery himself concealed by a shroud of plastic. Alright, enough about the packaging, let's open it up and see what's inside. Here we have Mysterio out of the box, and I have to say, there are few figures I've been dying to get my hands on as much as this one. If you're new to the channel or missed it in other videos, Spider-Man is my childhood hero, and Mysterio is my favorite villain of all time. So when the Vulture from the Homecoming film wasn't released, even after being revealed at various showcases, I was really worried we'd never see a Hot Toys Mysterio. But then, thankfully, out of the blue, out of nowhere, it was announced, and when it was, I was so stoked, and it was an instant dopo. I say all that to say, as a reviewer, it's hard for me not to bring my bias for this character to the turntable. And at the same time, as a fan and collector, it's equally challenging to temper my expectations for this figure. Is it a perfect release? No. Is it an amazing release? Absolutely, and in my opinion, this is a candidate for Figure of the Year, and it will easily be on my shortlist. Not because it comes with a lot of accessories, which it doesn't, but I love this figure and I'm so thrilled we got it because it's eye-catching at first glance and incredibly detailed upon closer inspection. The moment I pulled it out of the box, I was a kid back in the toy aisle with a pocket full of allowance. I was giddy, giggling, and surprisingly excited and impressed, which doesn't always happen. So, first reactions, if you haven't guessed it already, first reactions of Mysterio are high. Starting from the ground up, Forrest Gump said that there's an awful lot you can tell about a person by their shoes. Where they're going, where they've been, and in this case you can tell how good the rest of the figure is going to be, because these boots are stunning. The gold color and unique over-the-top style of these boots jump out at you at first, and I love them for that, but as you look closer, there are some other great features to point out. First of all, we get the always desired split-cut boot design. This is always a welcome feature in figures like Mysterio because it aids in posability for standing style poses, but it also gives flight poses a more realistic look, if that's possible for a flying man wearing a fishbowl. Nevertheless, these boots do look realistic, and that's due to the incredible sculpt work and stunning paint applications. As you can see here, the different textures in the lines of the boots is accentuated by some gorgeous weathering details and are then capped off flawlessly with an intricate feathering finish where the leather of the boots would crease over time. The knee guards that extend up at the top of the boots add to the exaggerated style of these boots, and I love how they look. There are some fine details in the sculpt, and the gold paint application, while a bit different in tone from the rest of the boots, is a nice complement to the overall look. The thighs are made up primarily of the green undersuit, which is a unique rubbery style material with some intricate detail. For starters, it's textured with a fine rectangular pattern, which is complemented by thicker black lines and small symbols in various places throughout. When it comes to these types of materials, there's always a trade-off between posability and screen accuracy, and in this case, while Mysterio certainly gets top marks for accuracy and detail, there are some concerns I have for this material's durability over time. It's more sturdy than other materials in its class in my opinion, but I will be cautious in the poses I choose for long periods of time. Midway up the legs, we see an asymmetrical set of armor pieces, and while I'm not sure what these do or how they stay in position, I can tell you these are beautifully sculpted and the paint application is stunning. There are some unique script style markings on the piece on the right leg combined with a purple accent, while the left leg is one tone of gold but with more of those markings. These are similar at first glance, but boast some fine detail upon closer examination, and I love how these look and what they add to the overall over-the-top aesthetic for Mysterio. While the undersuit has that classic comic look for Mysterio, the upper body armor is what places this Mysterio in the MCU. As I look at it here, it feels like Quentin Beck's costume designer put Iron Man, Doctor Strange, and some Red Bull in a blender and came up with the wildest costume cocktail of all time. While the overall look is glorious, the effort put into these details should not be overlooked. There is so much going on here, I honestly don't know where to start. The overall look to me is Iron Man inspired, with what should be light up green sections up the rib cage and across the chest, but the Doctor is in the rest of the strange details. On the outer sides of the armor, you can see some odd symbols in a silvery white, and then there are more of those ancient script-style sections starting at the bottom up through the middle of the armor, and then forking out in a Y shape at the top across the chest, and then capped off with the cape clips that have the raised eye symbol. Again, these are odd and awesome, and I love both the details in the sculpt and the paint application that finishes it off. There are two separate pieces that replace these when you take the cape off, and we'll get a closer look at those a little bit later in the video. Similar to the boots, the paint application on this main armor piece is off the charts. The gold looks amazing in and of itself, but the weathering passes after the fact add a realism to this piece that makes this figure jump off the screen and onto my shelf. My only issues with this part of the figure are one, it's one piece, so of course articulation is going to be hindered, but due to the way this is cut around the waist, for me this is a non-issue. But more than that, my biggest issue with this piece is number two, it doesn't light up. For the life of me, I can't figure out why Hot Toys didn't add this feature. I know there are a lot of details going on in this suit and a lot of time went into its design, but to me, the light up feature or lack thereof is a big miss in my opinion. You can see that Hot Toys tried to remedy this detail by adding some texture into those translucent green areas that should light up, but to me, it's just not enough, especially considering the light up feature we get in the dome, which we'll talk about a bit later. The undersuit is the same as that of the legs, as are my thoughts and concerns for it, except for the fact that it begins to fade and change color as it gets closer to the arm gauntlets, which is an interesting detail and what I want to bring your attention to. I have no idea how many times I've watched Far From Home at this point, but what I do know is that I never noticed that color fade in the arms before. Thankfully, Hot Toys did, and they captured it here perfectly, as well as these arm gauntlets. Like the boots and chest armor, these pieces are unique, exaggerated, and executed with amazing accuracy. They're a one-piece gauntlet that have an odd textured pattern top to bottom, which is sculpted really well and finished with a strong paint application. There are 4 sharp brace pieces that run up and down the gauntlet that again boast some incredible detail, and along the top we get more of that script texture. Overall, I love these armored gauntlets and can't say enough about what Hot Toys have done to recreate them. Mysterio comes with 3 sets of hands, a closed fist set, a dynamic set, and these relaxed hands. Each set is sculpted with some incredible texture and detail. They're a green glove to mirror the undersuit, with textured pieces on the palms and tops of the hands, and gold armor pieces to finish them off. They're a small accessory that are always easily overlooked, but each of these sets are really well done and they complete the overall aesthetic perfectly. As if all those pieces weren't subtle enough, let's talk about the cape. Like other parts of the costume, this cape is clearly influenced by Doctor Strange's cape on screen, and like Hot Toys' replication, this cape is a thing of beauty. The material feels like a soft felt to me, and I love its feel and texture, as well as how its color looks vibrant and regal. The cape is wired throughout, and those wires, along with the split in the cape from the bottom up about a third of the way, combined with the materials chosen, allow this cape to fall naturally and allows for realistic placement and different poses. To add to the realism, Hot Toys have gone ahead and pleated the cape in various places and have added some printed textures and symbols over the top that bring the whole thing to life in stunning fashion. Moving up from the cape, we see the neck gasket that houses the infamous fishbowl. And the look of this, once again, is over the top to be sure, and so is the detail on display by Hot Toys. The sculpt is flawless, as is the gold paint application, and like the rest of the armored pieces, the attention to detail in the finish is a subtle realism that sets Hot Toys apart from other 1/6 scale companies. As we zoom in to take a closer look at the dome, I have to say once again how intricately detailed this figure is and how thankful I am that Hot Toys made Mysterio a reality on my shelf. Yes, this dome is 2 pieces of plastic that clip together, but despite all the backlash that suggests otherwise, in my opinion, this seam isn't that noticeable and it's not that big a deal to me, especially considering why they did it. The dome isn't just painted on the inside as initial pictures suggested. There is actually a sculpted cloud housed inside the dome, which again is incredibly detailed in sculpt, and then the blue and purple paint application on the inside of the dome only accentuates its beauty further. In certain angles, you can actually see the gap between the cloud and the dome. With the lights on, this fishbowl looks fantastic, and I can't wait to see what it looks like with the lights off, which we'll get to in just a little bit. So all of this to say, yes, this fishbowl has a seam, but that aside, all of the benefits of that seam complement and complete this mysterious hazy look, and I love how it turned out. In terms of accessories, Mysterio comes with a decent amount of usable pieces, all of which are impressive and one of which is unexpected. Here we have Mysterio in a moderate dynamic pose utilizing 2 of his magical effect accessories. Before we get a closer look at the accessories used here, I do want to point out the articulation in the legs and boots. As I said, I'm a big fan of split cut boots because they allow figures like Mysterio to stand in natural positions without the use of stands, which is a big part of my display preference. I also want to point out that in a pose like this, there are no real strains on the undersuit material, and the cape hangs naturally due to the wires and pleats within it. I'm thankful that all these details are present in this figure and the realism it affords. Moving on to the magical effects pieces, I have to say, I always feel like these pieces are hit and miss. Sometimes they look great and are useful, and other times they just feel a little too toy-like. And I have to say, for me personally, these are more of the latter and are a little underwhelming. They're a translucent green plastic with a subtle metallic wash over the top, and while they look okay, something about them, as I said, they just don't work for me for some reason, and I don't see myself using them. For those who do, you'll need to utilize the 2 dynamic hands that slot into the guides in the back. These are really sturdy and secure, and I have no concerns for them falling off or anything like that. Before moving on, the other thing I want to quickly point out here is the articulation in the arms and shoulders. There's a great range of motion in the shoulder due to the ratchet and butterfly joints that have been used, and there is a nice swivel and double bend at the elbow. The only concern I have here is the bunching you can see at the elbows. As I mentioned earlier, this is a fairly unique material, and I can't say with confidence how well this will hold up over time if Mysterio is left in a pose like this. The other articulation point to note is the dome and neck. Due to the base of the neck and how it slots underneath the chest armor, it really restricts the articulation capabilities, and this pose reflects the full range possible. I wouldn't say it's a big issue, as it still looks natural in this pose, but it is something worth noting. Next up, we have Mysterio in a museum pose of sorts without his cape or dome, showing off the unexpected and interestingly controversial Quentin Beck head sculpt. The initial announcement teased a head sculpt, which was removed shortly thereafter, and then out of thin air in true Mysterio fashion, it suddenly appeared with this release. I'll talk about the sculpt in just a minute, but before that, I will say that while I'm glad we got this sculpt at all, I am a little shocked we didn't get the Edith glasses with this release. If you have the upgraded suit Spider-Man, of course that makes it a non-issue, but I still think for an accessory they already had on hand, they should have included it so we could have it in his. Speaking of hands, you can see another hand that Mysterio comes with, of which there are 2, and that's the closed fist. As I've already mentioned, these hands are tiny accessories with incredible detail, and I love how they look. I also want to bring attention to the articulation at the elbow once again. I don't know if Jake Gyllenhaal is this jacked in real life, but those guns are firing in this pose, and my concern isn't if Mysterio is on the juice, but what this type of pose will do to this material over time. The creasing seen in the full bend is a little unnerving to me, and I don't see myself leaving Mysterio like this long term. Moving on, I also want to mention the back plate of the armor. In contrast to the front portion, this boasts more of a clean armor look with little to no distress marks, and I love how this turned out. The paint app is stunning and realistic, as this portion of the armor would typically be covered by the cape and less likely to show the wear and tear that the front portion does. The detail in the sculpt and the paintwork are so well done here, and I love seeing all this detail, right down to the zipper and the undersuit. That sentiment continues as we move up and look to the armor pieces that replace the ones that house the cape. These slot in with one simple peg, and in true Hot Toys fashion, for such a small, seemingly insignificant accessory, it's really well sculpted and finished off with a perfectly executed paint application. As always, when it comes to Hot Toys, the head sculpt is what gets the praise or causes the biggest commotion in the collecting community, and I can honestly say I don't know what surprised me more: Hot Toys giving us this sculpt with this release, or the reaction it received once it was revealed. I've seen and heard so many comments about this head sculpt not looking like Jake Gyllenhaal, and I have to say, I couldn't disagree more. I think this is a spot-on representation of JG as Quentin Beck, and I can see him at every angle. The sculpt is there in all areas: the facial features, the beard, and the hair, and in my opinion, the paint applications are on par with some of Hot Toys' best. My only nitpick is the visible line across the forehead that almost looks like he had a baseball cap on for too long. It's a little too prominent for my liking, and it could have blended in a bit more in my opinion, but then I went back and watched some scenes from the film again, and I noticed that he really does have a prominent line from certain angles due to the shape of his forehead. So, there you go. Hot Toys really hit a home run in the subtle nuances of this sculpt. As much as I love this head sculpt, and I'm thankful we got it at all, I have to be honest and say I don't know how often I'll use this sculpt in my display. But as for a rating of this Jake Gyllenhaal sculpt as Quentin Beck, for me personally, I'd give this head sculpt a 9.5 out of 10. Here we have Mysterio with the dome back on, and in this view, we're utilizing the light up feature. And I have to say, video doesn't do this justice. In hand, this looks amazing, and without a doubt, I'll be leveraging some USB powered batteries so I can leave this dome illuminated like this all the time. In the video, it appears to wash out the paint application inside the dome, but in hand, it actually accentuates it, and I love how it looks. With a flip of the switch, here's what it looks like with the lights out. It's weird and creepy to see a floating dome in the dark, and while I don't ever see that happening in my display, it does show off how detailed the cloud sculpt is inside the dome and how bright that light really is. What this also reveals is how disappointing it is that the pieces in the armor plate don't light up in green as they should. Yes, they did apply a UV print that looks great if you want to go to those lengths, but I don't see myself going that route. For me and for now, it's lights on in the room and in the fishbowl. Here we have Mysterio in a more dynamic flight pose, and this is glorious. As soon as Mysterio was announced as the villain from the Far From Home film, I thought two things. One, how is Mysterio going to look in the MCU? And two, what's Mysterio going to look like in my display? And my hopes for both of those thoughts are realized in this pose. Starting off, let's talk about the base. I typically don't use these unless it's for poses like this one, and I have to say, I really like how this one turned out. The Mysterio branded print on the faceplate and top are on brand and really well done. But what I really care about and what I really want to point out are these two smoke accessory pieces. While the previous two magical effect pieces are relegated to the box they came in for me, these two pieces are going to be front and center in my display. They were sculpted to fit on top of the base, but as you can see here, they aren't limited to that look, and for now they're a little bit offset, just so I can point out a few other things. But before I do, I have to say, these are incredible accessories and I love how they turned out. They're sculpted plastic with a predominantly green paint application, but they've done a few extra passes and feathered in some grays and blacks to add a realism that is dynamic, mysterious, and appreciated. Before moving on, I did want to point out the realism in the legs and boots due to the accommodations mentioned earlier. The boots point down in realistic fashion, and the bend in the knee allows the top of the boot to extend out as it should given its exaggerated style. These are subtle mentions to be sure, but are realities I value greatly. Moving on to the upper portion of this pose, I did want to quickly point out a few other things. Notice the slight bunching in the undersuit at the waist area and the limitations the upper armor puts on the range of motion in the legs. These are small gripes, but I promised an unbiased opinion, and this, and the fact that he looks a little bit like the Hunchback of Notre Dame in this pose due to the waist grabber, these are the best I can do on this release. Out of all the characters in the MCU, Mysterio is one I was most excited to see introduced, and I couldn't be happier with how he was portrayed on screen or how he will be displayed on my shelf. Whether it was in the old 67 cartoons or in the comics that I read as a kid, I was always mystified by Mysterio, and I gravitated to the episodes and issues he was in. That nostalgia was rekindled with Jake Gyllenhaal's rendition of Mysterio in the Far From Home film, and I'm so thankful Hot Toys gave us this iconic villain when they've passed on so many others. I wouldn't go so far as to say this is a perfect release, but as I said in my initial reaction, it's close, and it's definitely in the running for Figure of the Year, at least in my books. My only real issue with this release is that we didn't get a drone or Hydro Man water elemental diorama. I think that would have easily thrown this release to the top of the charts, but I won't focus on what we didn't get because what we did get is an incredibly intricate and detailed figure with some useful accessories and an exceptional head sculpt. This is the Mysterio I loved on the pages of comics as a kid and on the screen as an adult, and so, all in all, after looking at Mysterio and everything he comes with, I'd rate this figure a 9.5 out of 10. I hope that you've enjoyed this video and that you want to stay tuned for more. If so, take a second and hit that subscribe button. There'll be more Marvel 6-scale figures and diorama reviews coming your way. Until then, stay safe and collect because you can.